Some people don't realize the price of losing you until life hands them the full invoice, with interest. Chosen one. Let this sink in before we even dive deep. Psychologists say the human brain replays humiliation more vividly than victory. And right now, somebody out there is replaying you like a painful blockbuster they can't escape. Because every scene reminds them they messed up the one connection that could have upgraded their entire existence. They're not just feeling regret. No. They're feeling the kind of regret that hits in slow motion, like when you drop your phone and somehow manage to narrate your entire life story before it hits the ground. That's the emotional state they're living in because of how badly they ruined things with you. You weren't just someone they dated. You weren't just someone they knew. You were the plot twist they didn't see coming, the divine rewrite they didn't know they needed. And somehow, through a cocktail of ego, immaturity, and world-class bad decision-making, they managed to sabotage the blessing standing right in front of them. And here's the part that keeps them up at night. You didn't argue, you didn't beg, you didn't chase, you simply evolved, and suddenly they're looking back at the version of themselves who thought they were playing you, only to realize they were actually playing themselves. Now they feel ridiculous, like someone confidently walking into a room with their zipper down. Everyone sees it. Everyone knows it. But they're the last to notice. That's the energy surrounding this topic. Because when a chosen one walks away, the universe doesn't just close a chapter, it changes the entire book genre. And they're stuck reading the consequences, line by line, wishing they could rewrite every page. So buckle in, because we're about to break down exactly why they feel like a complete fool for screwing up with you, and why their regret isn't temporary, it's transformational. Number 1. They realized too late that you were the only person who saw them without their mask. This is the part that hits them the hardest, not the loss itself, but the understanding that you saw them in a way nobody else ever has. With most people, they could hide behind charm, excuses, or whatever polished personality they performed for the world. But with you, that act never fully worked. You saw their fears, their contradictions, their softness, their confusion, and even the parts they didn't know how to explain. You understood the meaning behind their silence, the real story behind their mood swings, and the truth behind their defenses. You saw the human being buried under the performance, and that kind of recognition can't be replaced or faked. Now that you're gone, they're realizing just how rare that kind of connection is. They thought they could find someone better or someone easier to fool, but all they found were people who only saw the mask, the version of them they wished they were. And that's the thing. They didn't just lose someone who cared. They lost someone who genuinely understood them without needing a script. That kind of understanding is a luxury they didn't appreciate until it disappeared. What stings the most is the realization that you never used what you saw against them. You could have exposed their flaws, mocked their insecurities, or made them feel small. You didn't. You carried their truth with respect, not judgment. They didn't know how valuable that was until they experienced the opposite everywhere else. Now every new connection feels shallow compared to what they once had with you, because nobody else knows them past their surface image. It's sinking in that they didn't just lose a person. They lost the one soul who made them feel seen without feeling threatened. The one who could read them without trying to control them. And the more they reflect on this, the more they realize how foolish they were. They weren't just wearing a mask around you. They were hiding from the one person who would have accepted them fully. Now they're left with the mask alone, and for the first time, it feels heavier than ever. Number 2. They mistook your rarity for availability. Because they thought you'd stay forever. What's hitting them now is the truth they never wanted to acknowledge. They treated you like a permanent feature in their life instead of a person with limits, boundaries, and choices. They assumed you'd always be there because you showed loyalty, patience, and consistency. They thought your presence meant permanence. They believed your willingness to stay meant you didn't know how to leave. And that assumption is what makes them feel foolish now. Your loyalty wasn't a weakness, it was a decision. Your patience wasn't blindness, it was hope. But they took those qualities and twisted them into something they could exploit. They mentally filed you under safe, guaranteed, and forgiving, without understanding how rare those qualities truly were. In their mind, you were always going to be available for another chance, another apology, another promise. They didn't realize that someone with a big heart can still reach a breaking point. They're now facing the shock of losing something they thought could never be lost. You leaving wasn't a dramatic exit. It was a reality check they never prepared for. The absence hit harder because they didn't see it coming. They were so sure they had time, that you would keep waiting, that you'd keep giving them grace, even while they tested your limits. But grace runs out, and yours did. Now they're understanding the difference between someone who's common and someone who's irreplaceable. They used to think people like you were everywhere. They believed someone else would step in and offer the same emotional depth, the same stability, the same sincerity. They've now figured out that what you gave them isn't easily found. In fact, it's rarely found at all. The embarrassment comes from realizing they didn't lose you because you were clingy or desperate. They lost you because you were strong enough to walk away when they stopped valuing you. They mistook your kindness for permanence, and now they're living with the consequences. They thought you'd never leave. You did, and that single moment shattered the illusion they built around your loyalty. Number 3, they finally understand that losing you didn't put them back to zero. It put them in negative balance. What's hitting them now is the harsh reality that losing you wasn't a simple reset. They didn't return to the life they had before you. They ended up with a version of their life that's worse, emptier, and more confusing. And the more they sit with it, the more they realize that they didn't just lose a relationship or a connection. They lost the progress that came with having you in their world. You were the one who brought clarity where they had chaos, stability where they had uncertainty, and direction where they had no real plan. Losing you didn't just remove those things. It erased every step forward they made while you were by their side. Now, they're noticing the difference in every area of their life. Their motivation dropped, their confidence dipped, and even their decision-making became shaky without your grounding influence. People don't always understand the value of someone until the things that person held together begin to fall apart. And that's exactly what's happening to them. Life feels heavier now because they're carrying everything alone that you used to help lighten without even trying. What makes them feel even more foolish is the realization that they didn't know how much of their growth came from being connected to you. They thought they were progressing on their own. They didn't realize your presence was pushing them forward, helping them think better, move wiser, and choose smarter. They're now stuck dealing with the leftover version of themselves, the one that was never strong enough to carry life without your support. This isn't just about missing you. It's about recognizing the decline that happened after you left. The energy they once had feels drained. The goals they once had feel distant. The emotional balance they once enjoyed feels off-center. They're not at zero. They're in the negative because the absence of someone who genuinely cared pulls life backwards, not sideways. And the most painful part is they know they did it to themselves. They sabotaged the one connection that was actually elevating them. Now they're living in the aftermath, feeling the loss in every corner of their life, knowing they can't blame anyone else for the decline. Number 4, they realize they didn't just hurt you. They damaged their access to higher-level living. What's sinking in for them now is something deeper than heartbreak or regret. They're starting to understand that being connected to you wasn't just about companionship. It was about growth, awareness, and accountability on a level they had never experienced before. You brought a kind of elevation into their life that forced them to think differently, move differently, and confront parts of themselves they had avoided for years. That kind of influence doesn't come around often, and losing it didn't just leave a gap. It shut down an entire path of their personal evolution. When you were in their life, they were exposed to emotional intelligence without even realizing it. The way you communicated, the way you handled challenges, the way you processed situations with clarity, they were learning from you. You were raising their standards without trying. You were shaping their mindset just by being you. But because they were so caught up in ego and short-term gratification, they mistook your influence for pressure and your guidance for criticism. They didn't recognize that you were pulling them into a higher version of themselves. Now that you're not around, the difference is painfully obvious. Their reactions feel messier. Their choices feel impulsive. Their decision-making feels scattered. They don't have that energy in their life that encouraged growth, reflection, and genuine evolution. And the truth is, they're not getting that from anyone else. Their circle isn't challenging them. Their habits aren't improving. Their mindset isn't expanding. Everything feels stagnant because the one person who pushed them to level up is no longer accessible. They're realizing they didn't disrespect a relationship. They rejected an upgrade. They turned away from someone who wasn't just loving them, but also stretching them into a better human being. That's why the regret feels heavier now. They didn't just lose affection. They lost elevation. They didn't just lose support. They lost direction. They didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves they could have become with you in their life. And now they're stuck at the same level they were at when you met them. Only this time, the ladder you provided is gone. They know they caused it, and they know they can't get that energy back. That understanding is what eats at them the most. Number 5. They're embarrassed that you weren't even operating at full power, and you still outclassed their best. What's hitting them now is the uncomfortable truth they tried to avoid. Even the toned-down, restrained version of you was still more loving, more stable, and more intentional than anything they brought to the table. You weren't even showing your full capacity. You were operating on a level that held back your deepest patience, your highest wisdom, and your strongest energy, not because you were pretending, but because you were trying to meet them where they were. You adjusted yourself to keep the connection balanced, and even then, they couldn't rise to match your effort. Now, they feel embarrassed because they can finally see how much you held back for the sake of peace. They remember the moments when you chose silence over confrontation, not because you were weak, but because you didn't want to overwhelm them with truth. They recall the times you forgave quickly, not because they deserved it, but because you knew they couldn't handle real accountability. They're replaying how gentle you were with them and realizing that even your gentleness surpassed their best attempts at love. This is where the embarrassment burns the most. They thought they were doing enough. They thought their bare minimum was matching your energy. They had no idea you were functioning at a fraction of your real strength. And now that they see you from the outside, thriving, growing, glowing, leveling up, they understand just how far beneath you they were operating. They weren't even close. They're also realizing the difference between someone who loves at full capacity and someone who loves from fear, insecurity, or habit. You had the potential to give a love that heals, builds, and transforms. You simply never got the chance because they couldn't handle the training wheels version, let alone the full masterpiece. Now when they look back, everything feels humiliating. They realize they struggled with the version of you that wasn't even stretching. They couldn't keep up with your softest effort. They couldn't match your quiet love. They couldn't handle your gentlest standards, and knowing that you were operating on low power while still surpassing them makes them feel foolish on a whole different level. They didn't lose the best of you. They lost the chance to ever know it. Number 6. They're haunted by the fact that you became everything they pretended to be. This is the part that eats at them in a way nothing else can. They spent so much time performing maturity instead of practicing it, acting wise instead of learning, and presenting discipline instead of developing it. While they were busy crafting an image, you were busy building a reality. And now that you've stepped into a stronger, clearer, more grounded version of yourself, they're forced to face a truth they never wanted to admit. You became the kind of person they spent years pretending to be. They used to rely on the fact that you didn't fully see your own potential. They assumed you would stay beneath them, unsure, questioning yourself, not realizing how much power you carried. That's why they felt comfortable acting superior. They thought their performance would always outshine your authenticity. But now, the roles have reversed, and the reversal is brutal for them. You're living the growth they only talked about. You're walking in the confidence they only imitated. You're showing the consistency they could never maintain. What bothers them most is that you didn't grow out of spite. You grew because it was in you all along. They can see now that you didn't need to pretend, exaggerate, or inflate anything. You were becoming real, while they were staying stuck in their projections. That contrast is painful because it means their entire identity was built on smoke, and you, without even trying, have exposed just how hollow it was. The humiliation goes deeper than regret. This is a hit to their ego, their self-image, and even the story they tell themselves about who they are. Watching you evolve forces them to confront all the shortcuts they took, all the responsibilities they avoided, and all the stagnant habits they refused to change. It highlights the gap between who they wanted to be and who they truly are. Seeing you embody the traits they claim to have creates a kind of internal discomfort they can't shake off. It's not jealousy, it's self-recognition. They're haunted because your growth shines a bright light on the truth they spent years hiding. You were the real thing, and they were pretending the entire time. They're not just embarrassed, they're exposed. Number 7. They recognize that you were the only person in their life who would have told them the truth without malice. This realization is cutting them deeper than anything else, because it forces them to admit how rare your energy truly was. Most people in their life fall into extremes. Either they sugarcoat everything to avoid conflict, or they criticize harshly to feel superior. They were surrounded by voices that either fed their ego or bruised it, but none that helped them grow. You were the only one who could tell them the truth with a steady hand, not a raised voice. You corrected them without condescending to them. You addressed their flaws without shaming them. That balance is something they didn't appreciate until after they lost it. You had a way of calling things out without making them feel attacked. You didn't tear them down, you guided them. You weren't soft just to keep the peace, and you weren't harsh just to make a point. You managed to tell them what they needed to hear while still making them feel human. That's why your words hit differently. They came from sincerity, not superiority. And even though they didn't always like hearing the truth, some part of them trusted you because they could sense the purity behind what you said. But when they took advantage of you, dismissed your concerns, or acted like your honesty was a threat instead of a gift, they unknowingly pushed away the only person capable of helping them grow. Now they're surrounded by people who either avoid telling them the truth or enjoy highlighting their flaws for entertainment. There's no middle ground anymore. They miss the one voice that could hold a mirror up to them without trying to break them. This is what makes them feel foolish. They confused your honesty with criticism, your guidance with overstepping, your concern with control. They didn't understand that you weren't trying to fix them. You were trying to keep them aligned with their own potential. Losing that voice means losing direction, clarity, and emotional grounding. And now, when they make mistakes, there's nobody who'll gently pull them back on track. They're left with silence, judgment, or flattery, all things that stunt growth. They're realizing too late that you weren't just honest. You were honest with love. And nothing stings more than losing the one person who cared enough to tell the truth without weaponizing it. Number 8. They realize you weren't demanding. They were undisciplined. This truth is hitting them with a force they can't ignore anymore. For the longest time, they convinced themselves that you were too much, that your standards were unrealistic, and that your expectations were unreasonable. But now, with distance and clarity, they're seeing the situation for what it truly was. You weren't asking for anything extreme. You were asking for consistency, honesty, effort, and emotional maturity, the basics of a healthy connection. They weren't overwhelmed by your expectations. They were exposed by them. They see now that the real issue wasn't your standards. It was their lack of discipline. They were so used to getting by on charm, shortcuts, excuses, and last-minute effort that being with someone who required real growth felt like pressure. You weren't trying to change them. You were simply refusing to lower yourself to meet their laziness, and that alone made them uncomfortable. You didn't want perfection. You wanted presence. You didn't expect magic. You wanted responsibility. You didn't demand the impossible. You wanted consistency. Looking back, they feel embarrassed because they realize how low their effort actually was. They showed up when it was convenient. They communicated only when they felt like it. They apologized without changing. They promised without following through. They lived in the bare minimum and called it effort. Meanwhile, you were giving real time, real heart, and real intention. The contrast is humiliating for them now. What stings even deeper is the recognition that what you needed from them, discipline, emotional control, accountability, are the very qualities they've avoided developing their whole life. They thought your expectations were the problem. But the truth is, you simply highlighted the areas of themselves they've refused to work on. You didn't expose their flaws. Their own choices did. And now they're sitting with the uncomfortable fact that losing you wasn't a punishment. It was a consequence of their refusal to grow. Now they can see clearly. Someone mature would have understood you. Someone disciplined would have appreciated you. Someone intentional would have valued you. They weren't any of those things. And knowing that they lost you simply because they chose comfort over growth is the kind of regret that lingers. They feel foolish because the version of themselves you needed them to become is the version they needed to become anyway. Number 9. They finally understand that their manipulation was amateur compared to your discernment. This realization hits them like a delayed punch, slow, heavy, undeniable. They were convinced they were outsmarting you, slipping lies past your intuition, and keeping you blinded with half-truths. They didn't understand the kind of spirit they were dealing with. You weren't naive. You were observant. You weren't clueless. You were patient. You weren't falling for their tricks. You were studying them in real time. And now they feel foolish because the very things they thought they were hiding were the same things you picked up on instantly. Your discernment wasn't loud or dramatic. It showed up in the way you watched their patterns, not their promises. It showed up in how you responded calmly when they expected chaos. It showed up in how you adjusted your energy without announcing it. You were reading them on a level they didn't even understand themselves. You caught the cracks in their stories, the inconsistency in their actions, the desperation behind their ego. You saw the fracture in their soul, the insecurity, the fear, the self-doubt, long before they made their first manipulative move. And here's what truly humbles them. Even with all that knowledge, you responded with compassion, instead of retaliation. You could have played the same games, but you didn't. You could have exposed them, but you didn't. You could have broken their pride, but you didn't. The fact that you understood their intentions while still choosing empathy is the very thing that embarrasses them now. They weren't fooling you. They were revealing themselves. They're replaying every moment now with new eyes, realizing that the power they thought they had was imaginary. Their strategies were basic. Their attempts at control were obvious. Their emotional manipulation was transparent. You were never outplayed. You were stepping back, watching, choosing peace, while their ego celebrated victories that never existed. What makes them feel the smallest is knowing you could have destroyed their illusions at any moment, but you chose to let them save face. You let them think they were ahead. You let them think they were winning. And now that they see the truth, the embarrassment is overwhelming. They weren't playing chess with you. They were playing checkers against someone who had already mastered the entire board. And the part they'll never forget is this: you knew exactly who they were, and you still treated them better than they treated you. That's the kind of realization that keeps them quiet, humbled, and haunted. Number 10. They know they can never rebuild the respect you lost. And that's driving them insane. Respect is the one thing you can't beg for, manipulate your way into, or fake your way through. It's the spiritual credit score of a relationship, and once it collapses, it doesn't matter how many apologies, tears, or acts of desperation they throw your way. They finally understand that. What's tormenting them now isn't just the guilt of what they did. It's the permanent shift they feel from you. Before, they lived off the subtle honor you carried for them, your belief in them, your openness to them, the benefit of the doubt you extended even when they didn't deserve it. That respect was a mirror that made them feel bigger, smarter, more grounded than they actually were. But once you lose respect for someone, you don't raise your voice, you just raise your standard. And that's what's eating them alive. They can feel the silence in you, not the cold shoulder, the closure. They can sense that even if you ever speak to them again, it won't be from that same place of reverence, admiration, or emotional generosity they once fed on, because respect doesn't regenerate. Once it dies, it doesn't reincarnate. It leaves the soil and takes the roots with it. Now they're facing a version of you that sees them clearly, without the potential you used to project onto them, without the excuses you used to invent for them, without the spiritual cushioning you used to wrap around their insecurities. That's the part that's haunting them. They're not grieving the end of the relationship. They're grieving the end of their privilege in your life. They know they could rebuild trust if they worked hard enough. They could even rebuild communication if they humbled themselves. But respect is sacred architecture. Once they cracked the foundation, the building collapsed. And the worst part for them? You didn't punish them. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't expose them. You just evolved. And evolution is the one thing you can't apologize your way back into. Now they sit with the truth. The most valuable thing they ever had with you was the honor in your eyes, and they will never see it again. That realization alone is enough to keep them up at night. Number 11. They realize their absence didn't create a void in your life. It created space for your evolution. The truth hitting them now is the kind of reality that can't be spun into a story or softened with excuses. They assumed that by leaving, by neglecting, or by failing you, they would leave a mark of destruction in your life. They thought your world would crumble, your light would dim, and your growth would stall. That was the fantasy they nurtured, the delusion that you were dependent on them for balance, inspiration, or progress. And now, watching from the sidelines, they see the truth, and it's humiliating. Your life didn't stop, it didn't pause, it didn't even stumble. In fact, it surged forward. The absence they assumed would be a vacuum became fertile ground. You grew stronger, healed more deeply, and shined brighter than they ever imagined. Every step they thought would weaken you only highlighted their own weakness in contrast. They aren't haunted by your pain. They're haunted by your power, the one they assumed they could contain or control, now fully unleashed without them. The embarrassment is unbearable because they realize that the narrative they built, the one where you were somehow dependent on their presence, was completely false. You weren't waiting for them to validate your worth or to complete your journey. Their presence had, in subtle ways, been a limitation, a ceiling they never intended but failed to recognize. Their absence didn't create a gap in your life. It created an opening for you to evolve without the interference of their limitations, insecurities, or stagnant energy. Now they see it clearly. The life they assumed they were central to was actually a life they were holding back. Every moment of their involvement was a subtle constraint, and the space they left behind revealed what was always possible without them. And the humiliation of this realization is sharp. They feel foolish because they mistook their own importance in your story, not realizing that the story could and would thrive without them. They didn't just miscalculate, they misjudged entirely. And that's the kind of truth that echoes in the quiet, leaving them to confront a reality they can't undo. You evolved, flourished, and became untouchable by the very energy they once thought defined your world. Number 12. They feel stupid because they now see you were the only soul they could have trusted with their wounds. What stings them now isn't regret. It's the realization of what they threw away. You were the one place where their secrets didn't turn into ammunition. You were the one person who could see their cracks without mocking them, their fears without judging them, and their pain without magnifying it. You saw the human beneath their performance. You saw the truth they hid from everyone else. And instead of protecting the sanctuary you offered, they tried to act invincible inside it. They were so committed to looking strong that they sabotaged the one environment where strength wasn't required. They mistook safety for weakness. They mistook comfort for control. They mistook your gentleness for naivety. And now the cost of those choices is hitting them harder than any heartbreak ever could. Because the world they're in now, it's cold, it's sharp, it's full of people who turn vulnerability into entertainment, who twist confessions into leverage, who treat emotional honesty like a joke waiting to be told. They traded the softest landing for a battlefield. They walked away from the one soul who would have handled their wounds with care, only to end up in spaces where their wounds are liabilities. And this is where the humiliation begins. They're finally realizing that the healing they crave is locked behind the very door they slammed in your face. The growth they need, the honesty they secretly desire, the safety they never admitted they depended on. It all lived in you. They didn't just lose a person. They lost access to the version of themselves that only your presence could activate. Now, they're stuck performing strength for people who don't care, pretending confidence for crowds who aren't fooled, and hiding the same wounds you once offered to help them clean. They feel stupid because they finally understand the truth. You weren't just someone who cared. You were the only safe place they ever had. And they destroyed it trying to look like someone they weren't. That kind of realization doesn't fade. It haunts. It lingers. It stays. Number 13. They're ashamed. Because your come-up proved their worst fear, they were the problem all along. This is the kind of truth that hits harder than any argument, betrayal, or fight ever could. They spent so much time blaming circumstances, blaming you, blaming the timing, blaming anything that could take the focus off themselves. They told themselves stories about why things went wrong. But the reality is brutal. The failure wasn't on you. It wasn't your love, your effort, or your intentions that faltered. It was them. And now, with you thriving, evolving, and fully stepping into your power, that reality has nowhere to hide. Your glow-up is a mirror they can't turn away from. Every level you've reached, every confidence you carry, every layer of maturity you've developed, it's a reflection of what they never became. The qualities they pretended to have or promised to cultivate are now fully embodied in you. Their stagnation, excuses, and emotional immaturity are laid bare in contrast. You didn't just rise, you highlighted the void they refused to fill. The embarrassment is consuming because it's not just about losing you, it's about realizing they were the one holding the relationship back all along. They thought they could manipulate the narrative, excuse their mistakes, or blame circumstances, but your evolution refuses to let them. Every success you claim, every moment of peace you achieve, every instance of self-mastery they witness, serves as evidence of their own failures. It's a truth they can't deny, and a humiliation they can't escape. What makes it worse is the internal reckoning they face. They now see that their pride, their ego, and their resistance to growth were the exact things that sabotaged the connection. They weren't the victim, they were the obstacle. And that realization doesn't just sting, it gnaws at them, unrelenting, until they are forced to confront the fact that their own actions, not yours, were the reason things fell apart. Watching you thrive while they remain trapped in the consequences of their own choices is the ultimate blow. The shame is absolute, and the irony is impossible to ignore. They spent so much energy trying to control or win you, and in the end, it was their own flaws that lost them everything. Number 14, they understand now. That you weren't a phase, you were the turning point they weren't ready for. The truth that's settling in now is relentless, and it's humiliating for them in a way no apology or excuse can fix. They treated you like a fleeting moment, something temporary they could play with, ignore, or take for granted. They assumed your presence was disposable, a passing season in their life that didn't carry weight. But the reality is, you were never a phase. You weren't a trial or a distraction. You were a turning point, a force designed to shift their life permanently, whether they were ready for it or not. You entered their life as a mirror, reflecting the parts of themselves they didn't want to face. You were a lesson, showing them what true maturity, love, and integrity looked like. You were a catalyst, pushing them toward growth and awareness they had been avoiding. And they weren't ready. They couldn't handle the reflection you offered, so they dismissed it, ignored it, or tried to resist it. Now, the weight of that choice is crashing down on them. They feel foolish because they realize that losing you wasn't just a moment of heartbreak. It was a missed destiny. They weren't just letting go of a relationship. They were letting go of the very force that could have redefined them, elevated them, and held them accountable to their highest self. You weren't optional. You weren't replaceable. You were essential, and they treated you like an extra, a temporary character in a story they thought was all about them. The embarrassment is unbearable because they now see the gap between the life they could have had with you and the life they settled for without you. They're forced to confront the fact that you weren't just love or companionship. You were transformation. And the irony is devastating. The person they tried to control, minimize, or misuse was the very person capable of changing everything for the better. And they walked away. Their realization isn't just about regret. It's about recognizing a truth they can't undo. You weren't a phase. You were the turning point. And now that turning point is gone, leaving them with nothing but the sting of their own short-sightedness and the haunting question of what might have been. When someone finally sees what they lost in you, it's not just heartbreak. They're facing a mirror of their own mistakes, weaknesses, and missed opportunities. They're realizing the depth of your presence, the weight of your loyalty, the power of your growth, and the rarity of your soul. Every point we've explored shows the undeniable truth. You weren't just a person in their life. You were a turning point, a guide, a standard, and a force that elevated everything you touched. They see now that you were never a phase or a convenience. You were the kind of presence that demanded growth, inspired maturity, and exposed truths they were too afraid or unprepared to confront. They thought they could take you for granted, control you, or bend you to their will, but they were wrong. Your patience, kindness, and discernment weren't weaknesses, they were your power. Even when operating at a fraction of your potential, you surpassed everything they brought to the table. Now, they're left with embarrassment, regret, and the painful understanding that what they lost was far greater than they ever realized. They weren't just losing a connection. They were losing access to clarity, accountability, growth, and a vision of themselves they could have become. Your presence was a catalyst for transformation, a safe space for vulnerability, and a mirror reflecting truths they could no longer ignore. And the reality they're facing is stark. You're gone, and there's nothing they can do to reverse the evolution you've achieved or the space you've created for yourself. This is more than just a story of heartbreak or regret. It's a testament to the power of being a chosen one, a soul that uplifts, challenges, and transforms the world around them simply by being who they are. They may never admit it aloud, but their lives are forever marked by the brilliance you carried, the integrity you embodied, and the love you offered. Losing you wasn't just a mistake. It was a life lesson they weren't ready to learn, and the consequences will follow them forever. If you found value in this breakdown, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more brutally honest and soul-shaking insights. Like this video to show support, comment below with your thoughts and experiences, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. Your engagement helps us continue delivering content that challenges, awakens, and empowers. God bless you.